Welcome to the Check It Out podcast. Thank you for listening. This is another podcast in our series on our one book, World War Z by Max Brooks. I'm Troy Swanson.
Tishays.
I'm Joe Malarkey.
And we are joined today by Michelle Furlow, faculty member from Criminal Justice. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
One of the themes that we're going to talk about in our one book series this next year around World War Z is the idea of emergency preparedness. And obviously, zombies are not real that we know of yet. The preparation for catastrophes and things like that are real, and zombies help us see that and talk about it hopefully in an entertaining and fun way. So I wanted to start, Michelle, and ask you, what are the things as an expert in the field that you see useful in the kind of stories that come from zombies and zombie preparedness and that kind of thing?
Well, the CDC several years ago really ran with this idea on the concept that if you are prepared for a zombie apocalypse, you are prepared for any type of disaster, no matter what part of the country that you're in, that you will have the awareness to have water, shelter, and food. If you are thinking of taking care of yourself, your own survival, how would you manage fear, contagion, and sheltering in place for zombies, that you're really already in a mindset for any other sort of disaster that would be afflicting the American population. But this is a playful way to do it. It's a pretend way. We're not having the doom and gloom of, we're all going to die in the next couple of days, so buckle down. But in a fun-loving, sort of safe way to think about it. And the CDC, through their public health preparedness program, has offered a graphic novel, which is available online, including the list of all the things that you would personally need for your own survival if zombies were to begin to walk amongst us. And it's a great starting point to think about our own well-being in what could be many disasters.
And we can put links up on the library website, but I would imagine if you went to Google and just typed in CDC and zombies, you'll get all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of good information, correct, including exactly what you need to maintain your sanity and survival.
As a field, when I say emergency preparedness, as a field of study, how would you describe that? What is that? What does that mean?
Well, emergency preparedness is a bit of an offshoot of the larger emergency management field, which we have had natural disasters in the history of the United States from the beginning of the history of our colonies. But where it really got most of its recognition as a formal field was obviously after September 11th. We had one of the most tragic events that required coordination between multiple agencies at multiple levels, and a level of fear that, as the American public, we had never felt before.
Sure.
However, we have these various fire stations responding, emergency medical services responding, the select few, the heroes in society, all running to the problem, but yet they couldn't communicate with one another. We didn't know who was in the building. Port Authority, if you know from the history, actually told people, go back upstairs in Tower 2, you are safe. The fire department's telling everybody, get out. Individual security firms within the building were telling different information. So this highlighted a strong need to, how do we coordinate multi-agency efforts in disasters or even emergencies before it happens at the local, state, and federal level. So where they actually took a look was the firefighters out west. They had been doing this sort of coordination for years and had been very successful at it. However, it was fairly located, or it was fairly succinct to that area. So why don't we take what's worked well and move it to the national level? Katrina hits 2005, I believe, if my memory recalls correctly. And we'd made some vast improvements, but there were still tremendous difficulties in communication. How do we get people out? A majority of the population, or maybe it was a third of the population, didn't evacuate in time. And then the tremendous long lines of getting people out, getting access to food, and then the media ran with riots. So Katrina then really highlighted, even 4 years into emergency management, we have a lot to do. So what we're seeing now today then, because of the increase in funding that happened after September 11th, we're seeing a pop-up of most of your businesses require an emergency manager that will write a plan for your individual business to ensure continuity. Municipalities will hire an emergency manager to work as the individual that oversees the public safety, working with hospitals, public works, and typically they try to work in a 4-phase cycle: mitigation, preparation or planning, response, and recovery. Mitigation being how can we make changes prior to anything actually happening to reduce the likelihood of an event, reinforcing roofs, having an operating sewer system, having access to hospitals, whereas planning is the element of what threats are we faced with here in our community? Mm-hmm. Can we put plans into action? Writing on what everyone is supposed to do, who do they respond to, who's on call when, may be that finite, but may be a general operation plan. Clearly, response is when the incident does happen. How do we jump into action? Hopefully that emergency operation plan then is not just sounding good on paper, and it actually is a livable document. And then probably the most important part, recovery. Mm-hmm. We're still seeing in New Orleans, they're in recovery. Joplin, Missouri, after the tornado, they're still in recovery. The recovery phase is very long, the financial ramifications, but also the lessons learned. What went well and what can be improved on, because if this emergency or disaster happened once, it could happen again. So even Joplin, Missouri, what lessons could we learn here in our area if a tornado of that magnitude came through? We may have a different size population, different levels of municipality, what worked and what didn't. And that's typically what we're seeing in emergency management, and then preparation or emergency preparedness is really focusing on that planning phase. The trying to sit down and hash out all the what ifs, what could be, the unexpected, such as something like zombies. We don't necessarily think about that as a reality in our everyday life. You're going to run into traffic every day. You're going to have hot weather. You plan for that. Zombies, maybe not so much.
Right.
Well, and you'll be proud to know that, like, Troy spearheaded our emergency prepared document and plans
in the library.
Because it was things like we realized, we have portable communication, we have walkie-talkies. We'll take them so you can talk between the floors. If you have a group of people on one floor and there's a group of people on the other floor, so that you're in communication with them. A number of things like that we just hadn't thought of.
And, our main, people come in the library, they don't come in and immediately think, where are the exits? Or where do I go if there's a tornado? And so, in some ways, your staff has to be prepared to think for those people and then communicate with our campus police and emergency folks.
Absolutely. And what we found in the history of disasters, believe it or not, is that many people fall into their occupational role. So students would act like students should there be a disaster, in the sense that they would wait for where do we go, what do we do, someone will tell me. Whereas library staff it's their job to direct students and anyone here visiting the library. Typically people have fallen into that role, and the better trained and the more that you've actually practiced it, the more comfortable you're going to be, because fear is going to overcome all of us. Right. Whether we are, trained or not. So, in that we'd like to think that I would be very steely-minded and stay calm, but it's just a biological reaction. That's what keeps us safe and hopefully alive. So that's it's very relevant. And I think even worthwhile mentioning is you think about being on an airplane. They run through the safety mechanisms. And you look around that airplane.
Some people ignore it.
They're not even listening. They already have their headphones on. I'm flipping through Sky Mall. Look at this crazy gadget. I've heard this before. And what we find that actually in emergencies, even though they're large marked red signs, where do I go? I don't even know. I've walked past this every day. I don't know. So to constantly refresh on it, it is important, because we do get fairly blasé in our everyday going about our business.
With the framework you laid out in terms of emergency preparedness with the response and the prep, what do you think World War Z in particular, but other zombie stories, what do they get right and what do they get wrong?
I think what especially World War Z gets very accurate is how slow everyone is to respond. And I liked as much as very proud to be an American, we live in a great country, but it was really American pride that resulted in Brooks' depiction of our acceptance that this is a real problem.
And we should clarify, we're talking about the book now, not the film.
Correct. Yes, we are talking about the book. And I think the book does an excellent job in that we don't think we can handle anything that were to come over our borders, and we think that we're safe, and we have trust in our infrastructure, and we don't sense weaknesses, and we've been fine up until this point. So I think that the zombie stories have really gotten a good sense of that. I don't think it will happen here. And so therefore we don't prepare. And I think World War Z does a very good job of that until, unfortunately, it's too late. And that's our everyday life, that unless it's right in front of us, it's not something we like to think about.
And we had talked a little bit about, zombies obviously are not real, but there are outbreaks in the world, and there are these situations, and so we should be prepared in case something like that happens. So if you were a student on campus or one of our students, what are the things that you would recommend that you should have for preparedness to think about?
Well, certainly, and just awareness of what are the threats that face us here at Moraine. Something that we incorporate in the criminal justice classes is a active shooter component. Now, luckily, we are very fortunate on campus with Chief O'Connor, who is a foremost expert on active shooter. We are very safe on campus. The likelihood of anything of that sort happening is fairly rare. But one of the benefits of this college is that we are the community. Anyone can come in, anyone can go out. And we have a broad variety of people on campus. So someone who might look out of place probably wouldn't, unless it's a day like today where it's very warm, and why would that individual have a trench coat on and a hat or a ski mask? But even still, many of us are kind of in our everyday focus of, I need to check my Facebook and then get to class and get out of here, that we may not notice some of those idiosyncrasies. But as far as just having an awareness of how quickly information travels as well, that's one thing that I thought was really interesting about the book World War Z, is that I don't know if Brooks' intention was to model the spread of HIV out of Africa, but how quickly that actually happened. And to have an awareness of our own health initiatives, where you can go, what the resources that are available to you, I think is very relevant. But just knowing what the risks are here at Moraine. Ours are probably much more weather-related than having a severe sort of bioterror outbreak, which we're very fortunate for. However, we're probably very lucky with the amount of resources that we have in our community, the amount of hospitals, the access to immunizations. But with the snow that we saw that we had the past several years, actually, where campus shut down at 2 o'clock, I believe, was it in the fall semester, maybe early spring, and then in 2 years ago where we actually shut down for 3 days. How are you going to get to campus? How do you get your information about what's going on campus and information of that sort? So I think students can use World War Z as simply a great example of that we are vulnerable to. That doesn't mean you need to live every single day in a bubble or never leave your home, but that you can take everyday precautions and just simply keeping aware in what your immediate environment is and should be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if we translate from our campus and we think about our homes, what kind of preparedness should we have in our homes?
Well, probably the clearest message that has come out of the CDC as far as their zombie apocalypse preparedness is that every home should be prepared to sustain itself for 3 days. You should have a gallon of water per person in your home, food that is sustainable.
A gallon per day?
Per day, correct, yes.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting me on that. A gallon per day per person.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether that be bottles, or even the ability to purify water, any camping store would have access to those materials. Having food that you normally eat that may sustain itself for a period of time. We think of having canned beets and canned, Brussels sprouts, and then the emergency comes, and either you're probably going to be in a pretty bad state. But medication that you may need, and having extra clothing, having batteries. Do you have access to? You may not need a generator, but the 3 days is a particular guideline that if we have trust in the government that they will, and our emergency managers and our preparedness, that they will have at least transportation lanes open. But also an element to think about, and I think is very relevant for our students, is that your relief centers in the book, they talk about zombie shelters. How far could you walk in a day?
Mm-hmm.
And could
Correct.
you carry? I think of myself as a mother of two, a 5 and a 3-year-old, would I be pushing them in a stroller? Would I be carrying one of these children? But your relief center may be a distance that you may have to travel. But I also think that causes us to assess, if you can't carry it, you don't need it. So
sure,
that's an interesting aspect.
And are there resources to find out, like, in your own neighborhood where you would go in an emergency? Like, if you don't have those resources at home, or are there, resources right now that would tell me, who I should be contacting, how, if lines of communication are down, what's my next resort, that kind of thing?
Most communities use the online forum right now. You can go to the online emergency management page. They'll give you updates. A funny side note to this zombie storyline is Montana's emergency alert system actually was hacked several months ago, and the citizens were warned that the zombie apocalypse was happening. So they are still in the process of investigating how this actually happened, who was in charge of this, but that prepare yourself, zombies are coming, Montana. And people didn't know what to do. This is our legitimate source of alert and information. But having a radio that operates on battery would probably be very important.
Very handy. That happened to me when the storm sirens went off, and I found myself down in the basement going, I don't have a radio with me, so I don't know what to do except wait for the sirens to stop.
Yeah.
You just do not think about these things.
And we are very reliant on our smartphones, which is a great resource of information. Typically what we see is that, I think up in Canada where they had an emergency, and I'm embarrassed to be blanking out, but believe it or not, Twitter actually shut down their emergency management because they had reached the maximum amount of tweets per the day. And that's what they were using to get information to the community. So they had actually, I believe one of the gentlemen, the emergency manager, started using his personal account to get information. But so having access to a radio that's battery operated, spare chargers for your phone that you could keep it operational, as assuming that we do have electricity at that time. And most frequently it's word of mouth. So it's just simply having that awareness ahead of time. Where might be relief centers in my community should something happen? And most people tend to flock to the hospitals. And that can be a good or a bad thing, that the hospitals very quickly then become overwhelmed, but it is typically considered a central meeting point for many people during an emergency.
I talked to Chief O'Connor about some of this just on the side, and he said one thing people don't think about is having, especially medications. Like if there's a fire, families may have a point where everyone goes to meet, but then they realize, grandma's pills are up in the medicine cabinet now all burnt up. They didn't even know what to do. And if there was a significant kind of fire that really impacted a community or a tornado or whatever horrible event, that it may not be so easy to get replacements for that.
Correct.
He suggested having kind of a bag of stuff that you, with contact information, that if someone found it, they could get to you.
Right. You think of if somebody's a diabetic, like how long can they go without insulin if they're insulin dependent, or somebody with a heart condition, any number of those things. And that is what happens. I mean, people get removed from the
support systems.
Well, they get removed from the area of impact, and then they're not allowed back in because it's not considered safe.
Right.
For instance, when there's a bad storm or an earthquake.
Right. I think to even follow your question too, what could someone do, is knowing what your community offers, because that is one really, I think, reaffirming aspect. And I think Brooke's text highlights this as well, is that in disasters people do come together. But you have to know where to go, how to reach out. People do take care of one another. And we found, I think it was the film depiction of War of the Worlds, the most recent one with Tom Cruise. And he has the only operating vehicle. And people are trying to pull his young daughter out of the car, and they're banging. And I think that's probably that mob mentality is just as scary. How would people react? Well, luckily, disaster preparedness and emergency response has really found that in these events, people do rally together. But it's best to kind of jumpstart that by having awareness of what your community does have available, by knowing where those resource centers may or may not be, who should you call, and having those materials available. Even something as simple as, and this is, I encourage my own students, taking a photocopy of everything that's in your wallet, front and back, and having that as well. That unfortunately, doesn't it seem like even if your wallet's just stolen or it goes missing, And we'd like to think that somebody wouldn't pick up, oh, here's a debit card. Look, I'm going on a spending spree. We'd like to think that wouldn't happen as much as community rallies together, but to have those, it's just one less thing to worry about, having the documents that you may need in terms of establishing identity, your residence, and things of that nature. I think what becomes overwhelming is, this sounds like, I need water, I need food, I need batteries, should I run to Home Depot right now and get all this? And the nice thing is you don't have to do it all at once. The next trip to the grocery store, get that case of water and put it in your designated area. Put a couple of blankets down there in that designated area slowly over time, so that it begins, not only that, if it's a lifelong process, then you are replacing batteries that have probably died or replacing medication that is aged. So it's a continual thought process of keeping this up to date, especially as threats and weather changes and as we see. So one, I did want to comment, Troy, that you had mentioned that zombies aren't real. Well, I certainly hope not. I enjoyed the book, but there is a caveat to this, that there is a section of the public that part of the CDC's response or the controversy has been, well, clearly the government knows something we don't, and that they are secretly trying to prepare us. So that is something to maybe think about, whether it's for a flood or a tornado or potentially zombies, as a small camp of people believe, that to be prepared either way.
And then we have planned a public discussion
so
on this topic also,
which will be fun. So this is just a taste. It is called Surviving a Zombie Apocalypse, which will be Tuesday, September 24th at 12:30 here in the library. And Michelle will be one of our panel members along with some other faculty members. I think part of this discussion will be serious and the kinds of things we talked about here, and also kind of just fun, like what would you do if it really happened. So I think we're going to try to play it light, but also have some good information out of it. So I hope you can, that listeners can join us for that. And also, I wanted to ask Michelle, if you were a student on campus and you really are into this, like you think this sounds like a great way to make a career out of it, what are the things that we offer on campus that they could explore?
Well, we are very excited that we currently have the Homeland Security Certificate, which is 17 credit hours. We actually have a hazardous materials awareness weekend course coming up for students, or if you have a busy with a job during the week, a great condensed way to get this hazardous materials awareness course done with. And then on the books, we are still filing the paperwork and crossing our T's and dotting our I's, but slated fall 2014 will be an actual emergency preparedness certificate, 18 hours. So conjunction with the fire science program that we have on campus, our security certificate, Homeland Security, emergency preparedness, students of the criminal justice background, but also business, our nursing students, a great variety of students would really benefit from this knowledge. Like I said, any student who can go into a job saying, I understand writing an emergency operation plan, will be greatly appreciated by a potential employer.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming. Any closing thoughts? Okay. Well, we look forward to the conversation in the fall, and thank you to all of our listeners.